Okay, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started here. Welcome everyone to our last installment of our four-part webinar series, Demystifying Manufacturing IT to Drive Business Value. My name is Jonathan Barnett, and on the phone I have a couple other of my colleagues here from Brock Solutions. I'll be wrapping up this webinar series, diving in today with a webinar called Sustainment and Support, Go Live is Only the Beginning. I've been involved in sustainment and support here at Brock Solutions for several years now. I've had various different roles during that time, all the way from answering phone calls from users and responding to problems on the manufacturing floor, all the way to system performance monitoring, and now I'm involved heavily in our software development lifecycle. Just a couple housekeeping items before I get started. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on our YouTube channel afterwards. All mics are muted at this time. I'll speak for roughly 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with about a 5-minute Q&A session, at which time we'll unmute everyone's mic and open the floor up for questions. You can either type your questions in the chat functionality or use the audio to ask your questions, and then we'll conclude our 30-minute session. So just kind of run through agenda here on what we're going to work through today and talk about. First, I'm going to kind of level set with the space that we're talking about when we talk about sustainment and support and what services that provides and where we're providing the services to. Then we'll move on to why we need sustainment and support and why it's so important, followed up by some of our goals for sustainment and what we hope to get out of it. Then we'll work through a large bit of our time. We'll go through the sustainment methodology, do, plan, act study that we use here at Brock Solutions most successfully. And then we'll kind of talk about how we move forward from there, and then we'll finish up with questions. So just kind of to level set on the space that we are working with here. If you haven't been a part of our first 3 webinars, this image might look new to you. But essentially, for this webinar, we're mainly focusing on level 3 here, which is our MES and MOM layer. It's separate from the automation and maybe ERP or business layers. This is where you're manufacturing, you're doing a lot of track and trace and genealogy, and that's really where this sustainment and support cycle comes into play and how it drives the business value for you. So now I'm going to kind of pose a question here. So why sustainment and support, and why is it so important for us in MES? The problem at hand is that you've gone live with your first MES solution, or you're maybe possibly transitioning from an old legacy manufacturing system, and now what do you do to keep it healthy and growing? Hopefully this presentation will give you some direction behind where to go after go live. And when we're talking about sustainment and support, we're talking about an entity that is built around fast and repetitive cycles of changes to the system to continually drive your business value. If you're a company that possibly might be exposed to government regulation, mergers and acquisitions, manufacturing process changes, then you can already probably see the value that a fast and repetitive cycle of changes can introduce to your business, so that you can be ready to change with the environment and the industry that you're in. Your sustainment team can kind of be your multi-tool of teams. They're built to handle a wide range of things within your manufacturing IT space. This could be things such as reporting, change management, or maybe even system health. Although they may do various different things, it's very important to keep a high level of scope management on the sustainment team and what they're actually offering you within your MES space. There's definitely a fine line here between what a project team is and what sustainment team is. And hopefully as we go through this presentation, you'll see the differences between how this team or this, this resource might act versus how your project team performed during your go live and how it introduced MES into your manufacturing IT space. So moving on to some of the goals, and hopefully these goals will kind of reinforce why we need a sustainment and support team. First of all, we want to limit system downtime. We want to drive our business value on a continual basis with no end. We want to listen to business and manufacturing needs and then act. We want to continue to improve the system. And then we want to grow relationships between all parties involved. So hopefully, using the methodology presented in this webinar, we can kind of achieve all these bullet points here so that we're getting the most out of our sustainment and support. So now after we've gone live with our system, what do we anticipate after go live, and what does our sustainment and support team need to be ready for? With any large-scale manufacturing IT system, you're going to most likely see an increase in problems. This could be above the average of the problems that you saw with your legacy system. And here on the right side of the screen, I have kind of a chart or a graph that shows maybe an example of how you'll see the flux of problems over time after you're going live. So here we have manufacturing phase 1. It goes live in Q4 of 2013, and then your green line here, which is your incidents, they spike upwards heavily. And then they start to decrease and go back down until we go live with maybe, let's say, a phase 2 of your manufacturing system, and then you see that incident level or that problem level rise again. And this is where your sustainment and support team is going to be introduced to kind of remediate or bring that level back down to normal. You should also anticipate some business changes during this time after go live. Some use cases might change with your system based off the business needs. If you're doing any type of manufacturing process changes, the designs that you had during your project phase and your project functional specing may now be out of date or obsolete and may need to be updated. This could happen maybe Q1 after you've implemented or gone live. It could happen 2-3 years down the road, but you need to be prepared for this, and that's what your sustainment team is really there for, is to cope with those business changes. System growth and expansion is a big thing to pay attention to when you're going through sustainment and support. You want to be prepared for any type of unexpected growth or expansion that your system might encounter. Here it might be anything from increased server load to you introducing some sort of data into the system that your system is not able to handle, and your sustainment and support team is going to help manage that growth and expansion to a healthy level to where you're not really growing outside of the boundaries of your manufacturing system. So now let's move in and really take a look at the ITIL framework that we here at Brock use. Here at Brock, we utilize the Do, Plan, Act, Study methodology. In some cases, within this diagram here, we have gray blocks. We might offer individual roles here, such as reporting or incident analysis, and other times we might offer the whole quadrant, all 4 quadrants here. It all depends on the business needs of who we're working with and what they really need to get out of sustainment and support. This methodology is an integral part to what drives your sustainment process and how the gears continue to turn over in the machine that is sustainment and support. The structure, it really kind of gives the structure behind how you're going to define your roles and what it contributes to the manufacturing IT world. So we're first going to start off with the Do quadrant or service management. And the one thing that I want to bring attention to here is the support incident management. And that is, when your support team is coming in to support problems, they're really on the front lines of making sure that all manufacturing problems are resolved or attended to properly. And they're going to be there to answer the phone, and if there's problems, let's say with manufactured goods going out the door, they're going to be able to do any type of root cause analysis and get you back to making manufactured goods as quickly as possible. During this time, it's key to use detailed tasking and issue tracking. This was mentioned in our 3rd webinar in this series. And the same thing can be used here, the same tools can be used here to kind of track what type of issues are you seeing, what type of task are you putting out there for your support team to do. And within this, I guess, detailed tasking and issue tracking, you can gather quite a few metrics or data points that will allow you to better analyze how you can improve your system. Some metrics might be incident type or incident severity. And coupling these together can help you really prioritize what needs to be addressed in your manufacturing system, and that really plays into the next phase of our methodology, which is plan. Your support team needs to have a high level of communication between the users, and they need to understand what's going on the plant floor and what are they dealing with that's causing issues, and they need to understand going forward how should we resolve this, because essentially what happens is once your support team gets a call and it's something that they can't resolve right off the bat, they may have to invoke a change for this or some sort of a cycle for this that introduces your SDLC team. And when your SDLC team comes in, or software development lifecycle team, they're going to actually be the ones that are doing the changes and coding your change into the system. And that's why that communication from the users all the way to the SDLC team needs to be at an all-time high. So now we're going to move on into the plan phase or program management. This is where you've kind of got some, I guess, gas for your machine that is sustainment, and you're kind of start ramping up that engine and moving it along. And here your main stakeholders are going to be your support team, business users, manufacturing users, and your SDLC team. All these parties involved are necessary in order to plan your next set of changes to your system. The support team is going to introduce the problems that you need to be addressed. The business users are going to kind of prioritize those changes and what needs to be put in first. And then your manufacturing users are going to be there to really communicate their needs to the rest of the group. And then finally, you have your SDLC team, which is going to be the ones that are actually doing the code changes and putting that into place, into production for all the rest of the stakeholders. During this process, it's important that you have a clear scope around the changes for the sustainment cycle. You really want to drill down exactly what you're addressing and what you're going to be implementing in the next cycle. And this is key to being efficient as possible during this implementation phase. Business and manufacturing users drive the necessary requirements here, so it's important to get as much input from them as possible. That way you understand exactly what you need to be able to do in the next phase, which is act, because what you don't want to do is end up going from plan to act, which is the next step, and then having to go back to plan, and you're kind of losing the efficiency of this whole cycle. And then lastly, your SDLC team needs to understand the requirements and listen to users. And this is where they're really, paying attention during a requirements gathering phase. They're understanding the problem, and then they're really designing a solution that will fit the needs as best as possible. Now we're going to move on to the act phase, and this is kind of where you're starting to really light up the fire, I guess, and see the fruits of your labor from the previous phase of the plan. This is where you're doing your code, test, and implementing, and you're really going to see some action here. This is where your requirements have been provided. You're making your design plans, and then you're coding those changes against the requirements that you had. Factory acceptance tests are important here. This is a component that you can kind of bring over from your project or your large-scale manufacturing system implementation phase. Your factory acceptance tests are going to allow your users to kind of walk through and step through what you've designed and what you've solutioned for them. So you want to make sure that they're walking through these steps and simulating what's actually happening on the plant floor as accurately as possible. You want them in there, you want them clicking buttons, you want them providing input back to you to make sure that you're getting exactly what they need. Once you get through this factory acceptance phase, you're going to go through business and manufacturing user sign-off. This is where you're saying, okay, what we've seen in factory acceptance test is going to fit our needs. This is exactly what we had hashed out in our requirements phase, and we're ready to release this to our production environment so that the whole manufacturing facility can utilize it. One thing you want to consider prior to coming out of this factory acceptance test or this testing phase is to consider the impact of the change to the system health. When you're moving through this, you might be introducing changes that could ultimately be detrimental to the system health. Although it might fit the needs of the manufacturing users, you could be increasing server load. You could be increasing data queries to your servers, which ultimately is not good for the system health and will introduce more problems into this cycle again. Now, before we go ahead and release our changes to production, we want to have some sort of backout plan implemented. You really don't want to run the risk of being exposed to, I guess, putting in some sort of new code to your system and there being a problem and that crippling the manufacturing system that you have in place, and then you don't have a way to restore that manufacturing system back to its previous healthy state. So you always want to have some sort of backout plan or something that you can kind of do a reset on to make sure that if something goes wrong during the code implementation phase, you're able to start up manufacturing again, square one, back where you currently were. And then we finally are going to release our changes to production, and this is where we kind of get to see, all the new good functionality and stuff that we've put in that hopefully is driving your business value continually. This also is kind of where your support team is going to re-enter the cycle, is during this code release stabilization phase. Your support team is going to be there to make sure that everything starts up smoothly. You want to make sure that your incidents are addressed right offhand if there are any. Some other things that might happen during this stabilization phase might be that you could have manufacturing start up a few machines early to make sure MES is working properly and everything within that space is working properly. Not only do you want to make sure your manufacturing system is starting up smoothly, but also you want to make sure that it's communicating properly to the other layers. So that means, your controls and automation layer, that means your ERP layer. So all those things need to come into play when you're, really going through this stabilization phase. And now lastly, we're going to move on to the study or event management phase of this methodology. Here I want to point out that it's important to do system health monitoring. This is where you're going to take a look at, what happened during the change management process and what have we introduced. Did it introduce any type of negatives to our system that was detrimental to the health? And then we want to take a look at the incidents from the change. What were the incidents from a change? Were they from, let's say, user error? And your data here is really going to tell the story. So any type of metrics that you've gathered. So, for example, I was talking earlier about incident type and incident severity possibilities. You want to make sure that your data here is telling you the story of what type of incidents are you seeing. Where do you need to address the problems immediately, and what type of priority do you need to put on these? And then metrics. I can't stress metrics enough here and why it's important to have some sort of benchmarks for your system. A couple reasons why. They help determine the root of your problem. They might show areas of improvement for your system. They could show you trends in system health, as I mentioned. And then they really will allow you to be more proactive instead of reactive. So a key benefit to having some sort of metrics is that you have a baseline to go off of, so that if you see your metrics start to deviate from these baselines, you can be more proactive than reactive. So you might be able to foresee some sort of manufacturing problem coming down the road prior to it happening, thus limiting the problem being reported, and you're going to have some sort of downtime involved with that. Another key thing here with metrics is that to have the right tools to collect metrics from day one. So right as you go live with your system, you want to have the tools implemented to be able to capture all the metrics that are necessary for you to be able to make these proactive decisions. So it's important to be thinking about this during your framework study, functional speccing, all that during your project phase of implementing your manufacturing system. You want to be thinking about the tools that you need to collect metrics, and then what type of metrics am I going to be looking at going forward. So it's important to have this from day one. And then also, lastly, during this study phase, we're going to take a look back and see what type of lessons have we learned, and what can we apply for the next cycle of changes that we implement into the manufacturing space. So this is a good time to kind of reflect back and see what you need to improve for next time. So, after this last phase of going in and studying, I guess, of what you've done and everything, you're really going to start back right into the do phase, which is that first upper left-hand quadrant, and you're going to just keep going over and over again. This is, kind of what the sustainment and support model is supposed to help support. There is no end here like a project. A project might have a discrete timeline of begin and end, but your sustainment and support cycle really is turning over constantly, and we're introducing more changes and more improvements to your system to help you grow. This offering some sort of agile and a responsive approach to your business needs. So like I was talking about earlier, with any type of government regulations, business process changes, you're really introducing agile and responsive changes into the system. So a question might be, what number of cycles am I going to see during this change management cycle or this support and sustainment cycle? And this can really vary based off of your business need. It could be anywhere from 4 changes, or it could be quarterly, a year. It could be, you have 12 changes or 12 change cycles per year. But you want to definitely plan these code releases ahead of time. So this could be all the way to the point to where you say, hey, I'm going to have 12 release cycles throughout the whole entire year, and you set those dates for those release cycles. And you want to stick to these release dates. It's important that you stick to them so that your business and your manufacturing can plan ahead and be ready to kind of, I guess, accept and work with you on these manufacturing system changes that you'll be introducing. So let's go ahead and revisit our sustainment goals and make sure that we've kind of, I guess, achieved everything that we wanted here. So we're going to limit system downtime, and we're doing this by having our support team there to be on the front lines and really answering the phone calls and making sure that manufacturing is not having any problems. Everything's being pushed out the door properly, and your support team is really going to play an integral part here to reaching the sustainment goal. We're going to be deriving business value on a continual basis, and this comes from doing the do, plan, act, study methodology over and over again. We're going to be listening to our business and manufacturing needs and then acting. This comes from intense requirements gathering and meetings in your program management phase to make sure you understand what's going on and what do you need to implement in the next cycle. And then you're going to continue to improve the system. This could be anything from health system monitoring to where you're gathering the metrics, you're making sure you're analyzing the data, making sure what's going on, where are areas that we can improve in this system. And then you want to grow your relationships between all parties involved. And this really comes down to having every single stakeholder in this group communicating across all levels. And these relationships that you grow within this group is going to pay dividends in the long run. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and conclude the presentation. I'd also like to remind everyone of next week's IndustryWeek and MESA conference. Brock Solutions will have representatives there in attendance, so make sure to come by our booth and talk with us. Also, Doug Wilhelm will be there. He's a representative that will be there with Brock Solutions. He worked with RJ Reynolds during their MES Go Live and Sustainment and Support and has a lot of experiences, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to talk to you about the experiences and things that they saw when they went live with their manufacturing systems and how they continue to sustain and support that. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor for questions for the next 5 minutes or so. We're now going to unmute everyone's mics, and if you have questions, you can either ask via audio or via the chat functionality. Thank you. So it looks like I've got a question coming here through the chat. What type of system monitoring metrics do you gather to measure system health? Yeah, so I mentioned briefly in there system health and how it's important to your sustainment and support. These type metrics could be, it really depends on the type system you have, but some examples might be reporting metrics. So how long is a report taking to run for your users in the system? Are they waiting a long period of time to have an inventory report from your manufacturing floor, return data to them? You could also be looking at server load. So do you have peak times when your servers are going under intense load? Is it maybe during a specific shift or a specific area of your manufacturing system? I guess another area possibly would be if your system has any type of maybe web interface, you could be analyzing things such as web page load time. So how long is a web page taking to return to your users and getting them the information they need? This is kind of this kind of stuff is really going to help you be more efficient from a manufacturing standpoint, and it's also going to help you kind of be more proactive in reducing the amount of problems that you get reported from the manufacturing plant floor. So I see another question here. How often do you do standard maintenance? So maintenance is definitely going to be dependent on how big of a window you have for your manufacturing processes to be down. Depending on the structure of your system and how integral it is tied into manufacturing product and pushing it out the door, it might depend. You might do it quarterly. You could do it monthly, like I said. But that really is a decision that you have to make with your manufacturing users and your manufacturing operations managers to make sure that the type of downtime that you're going to be seeing, I guess, with the system is going to be acceptable for them, and that you're not really putting them at a disadvantage by taking the system out of commission. So it's got another question here from John. How many people typically support the system site? So typically you're going to have, like I said, I mentioned support and sustainment teams. You're going to have at least a couple resources on support that are going to be handling the incidents that come in, and that can fluctuate up and down, as I said, over the phases of your manufacturing go lives. So you want to have the proper resourcing there from a support team standpoint, And then it also depends on how often you're going to be introducing your changes. So you might have 4 or 5 people on your SDLC team that are introducing changes to the cycle. And then, like I was talking about during the do, plan, act, study methodology phase, you've got different components there, different roles that you might be playing from a service and sustainment standpoint. So depending on how many of those roles you want to fill, or how many of those components you really want to show, that's where you're going to get that number of how many people you need to provide from a resourcing standpoint.
Yeah, and Jonathan, this is Steph as well from Brock Solutions. I think it really depends on the size and the scale of the MES. So we have some customers that have 8 plants running all over North America. Others have dozens running around the world. Others have 1 plant with limited MES functionality. So the numbers can really fluctuate depending on all those things Jonathan said. I think the one thing I would say though is the roles are really key. So as you're thinking of your MES implementation, it's important to think about how you're going to satisfy those roles in those 4 quadrants, whether you can do it, whether you insource it and it becomes a part-time job of someone or a full-time job, whether you outsource it and you have a team that's playing different, the different quantities are really going to depend on the scope of the solution that's being sustained. So I think what we've seen is whether it's 1 guy or 10 guys, it's really important that those roles are thought of first and before the project, even ideally before the project even initiates. So you have a broad perspective of what that overall team and the total cost of ownership of the program is going to be over its life cycle.
Okay, thanks. Just a little bit of a follow-up to that then. Do you create the center of excellence for the manufacturing IT system, but how do you have knowledgeable people in the business and train them to be kind of super users as well, or do you see it typically relying on one group, traditional engineering model where they do everything?
Sure, I'll go ahead and take a stab at this one. Yeah, so you do want to have those, I guess, super users involved in the business side of things. This is really, that's going to help you prioritize and mold the changes that you need into the next sustainment cycle that you're going through. If all your technical or super user experience is all in the sustainment and support team, you're not going to have any type of I guess cohesion or crossover between your business and your support and sustainment team. So you really want to have someone on that side to be able to understand how does this really play into, let's say, change management, how does it play into how we do our releases, so they can understand, they can communicate, like, let's say, downtime to manufacturing, and they can kind of be the, I guess, communicators between all the parties that are involved. So it's definitely, it was definitely a benefit to have some sort of super user or system, person that has an expert knowledge base in the system on that business side.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, can I ask one more question then?
Sure.
It's related because you said about support and it could be centralized. What's your experience? Do people run these as global systems, as centralized systems, or do they run them as site systems and then just do some kind of aggregation of data for reporting? I know it depends, but what do you see out there?
Okay, so this is Steph again. So in the case of the customer Jonathan's working for, I think there's maybe 8 sites that have MES, and there are 2 instances of MES that's been rolled out across these sites, and that is a central sustainment and support team. So it's all out of one location, but they support all of the different sites. For other customers where it's more global, it's kind of a combination where you have a site IT, dedicated site IT person that plays a manufacturing IT role on the site that does the catch and release. So they're typically trained to do the first level of triage and know what they're looking at. Is it an MES issue? Is it a controls issue? Is it a scanner? Whatever the issue is, they kind of know what they're looking at and they know where to route it. And then the routing typically goes back to a centralized team, whether it's Brock or whether the company insources that level 2 function, MES support function. So I think in our experience, it's really important to have all of these roles defined. And if you don't have those site IT, and most plants are 24/7, so even the best case scenario is that site IT resource is only available for 8 hours anyway. You need a plan and a route and a control book that would say when this happens, get this as quickly as possible to the support team. So I guess that's been our experience anyway.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions that we have coming through from everyone, we're bumping up about 12:45 here, so we're going to go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Once again, our contact information is on the screen here, and we appreciate everyone logging in.